One is to actually engage in a democratic protest against a government, but to say that the Supreme Court must not follow the law or we will dictate terms as to what the Supreme Court must do, I don't think is acceptable.
In front of us,
the deep state exists, but the deep state cannot be the omnibus defense for every policy failure or policy paralysis.
Now there is a big confusion about what happens to the cases that have been filed against protesters, many of them violent, across the country. The Supreme Court said very clearly that anyone who has criminal antecedents, proceedings against them can continue. The CJP has come out and said, and I quote, they have said that this results in breach of public trust and the court's order is uninformed and wholly unacceptable. What do you make of this?
What I understand, approximately 2,900 cases have been identified, out of which approximately 989 or close to 1,000 cases are those of individuals with a previous criminal record. So barring those cases, I believe, based on what I've made of the orders and what was observed in court, that the rest of the cases shall continue. No coercive action shall be taken against people who are first-time offenders, and there shall be no action taken against minors. That's what I think has been ordered. I think that's a fair order, because if at the end of the day there are people with criminal antecedents who have participated in this, who have colored this protest, who have unnecessarily brought it a certain degree of disrepute, when there are genuine protesters who were airing their legitimate grievances, I think to say that cases against everyone must be withdrawn is a demand, is less of a demand and more of a threat. And when such a threat or such a, let's say, an expectation is aired with respect to the Supreme Court of the country, I think it crosses a certain line. One is to actually engage in a democratic protest against a government, but to say that the Supreme Court must not follow the law or we will dictate terms as to what the Supreme Court must do, I don't think is acceptable.
Because the argument being made is that there was a commitment that the government made on the 25th of July, based on which this organization called off their protest at Jantar Mantar. And now the government is trying to invoke the court's order as a justification for going back on its stated commitment. Is the government bound to now withdraw cases? And what you mentioned are only the criminals who have been identified in Delhi. In the case of the Delhi violence, you've got similar cases lodged against them in states as varied as Maharashtra, West Bengal, Bihar, etc. Can the government now be made to withdraw all cases nationwide based on the commitment it made?
The commitment that was made is a commitment based on an understanding between the parties, which has no legal value. It has no legal standing. What enforceability does it have in a court of law? And despite there being no backing of the law, the government, I think, from what I understand, has given a solemn assurance that it shall withdraw cases against first-time, let's not use the word offenders, first-time protesters with no criminal record, and also that it shall not initiate any course of action against minors. I don't see why is it that the so-called CJP protesters are arguing on behalf of those who do have a criminal record and who have chosen to use this protest to muddy waters, so to speak. I don't think there is any basis in law to expect the government to withdraw the cases that have been registered against people with a known track record.
Absolutely. And that brings me to the next question. People right now are very confused. They can't figure out who's the victim, who's the villain. Where did somebody act in self-defense, where they were actually provoking the authorities? Now, there are multiple such clips floating around where a police officer is slapping a woman, where women are attacking cops or men are attacking cops, sometimes even juveniles. How does one decide? Purely legally speaking, how does one decide where you were provoking the authority and where you were acting in self-defense?
Padmajaji, the fact of the matter is, it is very difficult for the common public to make up its own mind on the subject, nor are we privy to certain information that the government may have. Similarly, we are not even privy to some material that the protesters may have with respect to state excess. Okay, so I don't think it helps to play this out in the court of public opinion. It is best for this to be dealt with by the courts in accordance with the law. And I'm not trying to give a ton to the death statement here. I'm just trying to say that it will become a tutu meme of sorts in the court of public opinion because nobody is in possession of complete facts. Second, the larger questions of privacy that have been aired during the course of these proceedings, I think it's a fairly tricky question because can there be an expectation of privacy when you're actually conducting a protest and when the managers of the protest cannot take responsibility for the actions of everyone? Then the government will have to step into the picture to at least have some oversight. considering that there were calls of Gen Z-like protests, such as the Nepal protest being replicated here, then the government has every right to present to service its security mechanism to understand if there are any foreign assets or elements that are participating in these protests, right? So, on the one hand is the legitimate concern of the state, let's say a legitimate state interest in ensuring that peaceful protest is not hijacked in the name of some colorful revolution or by a foreign party or foreign actors, multiple foreign actors. And on the other hand, the government also has to take into account that it can't constantly cite the existence of foreign elements to take away the right of a democratic protest on legitimate issues. Both have to be balanced, and that is a balancing test which is best performed by the court and not in television debates or discussions.
But when you have pictures of a policeman using an AK-47, or when there is evidence now that a pump action gun or a pellet gun was used on civilians, aren't the odds then stacked against the government because the monopoly of power is in your favor?
100% yes. The government has to answer when there have been instances, and I'm sorry to say disgusting instances, of police personnel using lathis or whatnot to behave with women in a disgusting manner without any kind of provocation whatsoever. I think the government has to answer questions, because I think I saw questions raised on social media about the absence of IPS personnel on the ground to control the situation. Why is it that you have the officer cadre both in the police service as well as in the armed forces? Because they are meant to ensure that any innate tendency of violence or brutality doesn't take over, and there are some sane responsible voices who are responsible for the situation. So if ultimately the job here is to simply throw the pawns under the bus and let's say constables under the bus without asking questions as to who else is responsible, and when people realize that there is a tendency of this protest going out of hand and what kind of protocols were discussed, who was made responsible for the oversight of the situation, those questions have to be answered. And the police cannot be a judge or let's say an investigator in its own cause, as rightly observed by the Supreme Court and other commentators on the subject. That requires an independent judicial probe.
And on the side of the organizers, can they simply shrug off responsibility and say, we were only responsible for what was happening on stage? If somebody on the outside periphery decided to molest women or misbehave with people, we've got nothing to do with it?
Sorry, if that is the case, then they don't get to argue on behalf of everyone to ask for blanket withdrawal of cases. If you do not take responsibility for everything that happened there, then you don't get to become the mouthpiece of everyone who's present there. You take responsibility for the people who you have summoned there or marshaled there. Can you identify that? Can you give a list of people who have come there at your behest and because of you? Have you handed over a list and say, these are the people we take responsibility for and the others we have no idea, therefore the law is free to pursue its own course? If that's not the case, what kind of threatened tactic is this? This is what I said, that these are the makings of what I would call urban warfare, where you choose to come out with an amorphous, inchoate, let's say group, and you mix all sorts of elements in that group, and when the state chooses to press into service its levers, legitimate levers into service, you then say, sorry, we are responsible for only some, but we will certainly argue for everyone to ensure that there is no state action. This is, in law we call it the Angora cat behavior, wherein the size of the cat shrinks or it expands depending on the argument that is being presented. This is a disingenuous argument, and I don't think we should entertain it. The point is, at some stage, the government needs to basically say, here is where we are interested in taking responsibility for excesses, and the judicial probe will account for those people who have committed these excesses, and we will not stop at the bottom rung of the food chain, we'll go up as well. Similarly, we have the right to understand who was behind these protests, who was pushing it beyond legitimate and acceptable lines, and what kind of interests were being pushed or advanced through this.
And also the culpability will have to be decided, because now it is documented, it's on camera, cases of Stone-Pelting that has taken place, where you have got members of the RAF, the police being attacked, several of them have been left injured. So you can't just keep them at an arm's distance and say, these were some unknown people. If you organize the protest, you're saying in the future, you might be held culpable for them as well.
I would like to ask this question, and there are two questions here, and this hopefully answers the issue that you're raising. One is, assume for a moment that there is a genuine student protester who has gone there to air his or her grievance with respect to the manner in which NEET as an examination has been conducted and the patchwork of solutions that have been offered. And if that student were to be subjected to an excess for no reason, and if you were to choose of a parent, would you want the responsible people to leave scot-free, to go away scot-free without any kind of accountability, without them being brought to justice? No. Similarly, put yourself in the shoes of a person who has been deployed there, who is also a person with a family. And in this instance, we also have, unless it's fake news, which I'm not in a position to confirm or verify, that there were instances of pregnant constables, female constables also being injured. Now, if that were to be the case, who is going to take responsibility for those people? After all, it's not as if our security personnel, police personnel have signed up for any kind of treatment without any kind of protection, without any kind of counteraction, without any kind of legal recourse. Even they too have rights. They too have countervailing rights. So both sides will have to be balanced. Neither party gets to say that might is right.
Because the organizers are saying this is not our problem. If there were criminals who were present there, the police should have known. The police should have removed them from the spot. Why should we be held responsible for people we did not call? We only asked for the students to be there. We never asked for these people with criminal antecedents to be present there.
See, then they should not have any problems with the use of facial recognition software to weed out these antisocial elements. Then why are they presenting a kind of pseudo defense when police personnel of the state chooses to employ facial recognition software or other ways of identifying who are the participants? There, if you choose to bring in privacy as a defense, then how will the software or let's say the police personnel say, I will look only at the criminal. I would have to weed out, I'll have to look at the people who are participating and identify which of these people have prior antecedents, criminal antecedents. How is it that the managers or the organizers of the protest are presenting a defense which conveniently aids the antisocial elements? If they are truly serious about preserving the integrity of their movement and the legitimacy of their cause, they should actually be supporting the government in identifying those people who are not partied or part of their protest and say, these are not our people, we are not responsible for them. So please do what you deem fit in accordance with the law and leave it for the law to take its own course. Let them, if they wish to, they can also give them legal service or let's say legal aid. But they can't say that you must drop all cases even against those elements who we are not responsible for. What kind of an argument is that?
Finally, when you step back and you take a look at what has happened over the last month and a half, what do you make of this model of protest? Because this is being spoken of as the next generation of mobilization, where completely disparate groups get together, driven by a common cause, and they did manage to get the minister's resignation.
I am not going to dismiss the legitimacy of any kind of peaceful democratic protest because that is a constitutionally guaranteed right. And that is an extension of peaceful and peaceable gathering or agitation. So I will not run it down. Second, I would like to draw from the words of that brilliant boy Harsh Dubey, which is, when genuine candidates wanted to protest peacefully and raise this issue way back in June 2024, the government showed them the door and denied them the permission to hold such a protest. Well, when you don't want genuine people who wish to engage with you meaningfully to hold a protest, or you've pushed them to a point where they don't have any other means of airing their grievances, and they don't see any institution responding to their grievances legitimately speaking, then these are the kind of lumpen elements you're actually going to encourage. And now the precedent that you have set is law-abiding peaceful protesters will be taken for granted, and those who bully, threaten, pelt stones are the ones who will ultimately be heard, notwithstanding the fact that the cause may be legitimate or genuine. Who has set the precedent for this? So the government must take some responsibility for not having acted on this issue, and I will not give the government a free pass on the issue at all whatsoever, because it's not something that has blown up overnight. It has brewed over at least 2 years, over multiple examinations. And if anybody chooses to resort to whataboutism, saying Punjab has done this, or who has stopped you from taking any kind of action against those states, or initiating any kind of democratic action or legal action with respect to leaking of papers? Who has stopped you from making that a legitimate political issue in those states where you're not in power? If you have chosen not to do so, you don't get to say, I didn't do it, therefore you scratch my back, I scratch my back. The country pays the price and students pay the price. Coming to the question of the other aspect of the equation, which is that yes, urban warfare, street terror, or these kind of tactics have long been indicated by the geniuses of the other side as the last option of resort when they fail electorally. There is no response mechanism that the government has come out yet. I'm sorry to say what has happened. The net result is those who were willing to engage with you peacefully in the interest of addressing the issue constructively have been given a go by. Instead, lumpen elements have gotten the better of you. That is the unfortunate truth. That's the unfortunate reality. So I would say there is no point in now playing the victim. The government has to set its house in order in terms of having a constructive feedback mechanism where legitimate issues come back to it in the form of feedback, advice, or whatever it sees. And also it needs to have the PR tools, the legal tools, and the constitutional tools to deal with this issue.
And now
these are different aspects.
And now that this precedent has been set, how will we know, or when will we know when that line has been crossed between a legitimate democratic street protest and mob justice? Because the constitutional court is now going to be bypassed by the strength of numbers, God forbid, on the streets.
See, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, even on the eve of the 2024 elections, several commentators, including myself, have commented specifically that saying that this will result in the streets being tested. Okay. If the government were to pit itself exclusively against the protesters,
and you think that moment has come where the streets are being tested?
100% it has come, especially after the recent electoral outcomes. I think that situation has come, and a successful model has been evolved. Now we'll have to see how replicable the model is and how scalable the model is from the perspective of the protesters and from the perspective of the mischievous dramatists personally. The issue that you have to consider is this: if you want sections of the society to support the government in its bid to deal with these elements and also constructively engage on issues of legitimate importance, then the government must be seen as getting off its high horse and talking to people. When that doesn't happen, even the genuine support base will have no other option but to say, you don't listen to anyone. Because allow me to say this, when the well-wishers of this government have been constantly airing these legitimate issues and have been providing feedback through private channels and public channels, and they were not paid heed to, the message that you're sending is you would rather engage with a belligerent opposition that doesn't respect the law than to people who are willing to respect the law and point out something in national interest. That's the message that has gone out. And it's a sorry state of affairs where unfortunately it's come down to a point where we are back to the situation of the 90s or the 2000s, where the message that the government used to send to people was anybody who's willing to pick up the weapon against the state will be given a place at the negotiating table. Anybody who respects the constitution, wants to abide by the law and still put forth his or her point of view will not be respected, because their inability to pick up the weapon or their inability to pelt stones will be seen as a sign of weakness and not their law-abiding nature. That's the message you have sent.
And I think that's food for thought, very sobering thought. Hopefully the government is going to think about this and not brush it off simply as some kind of political opposition or a motivated piece of advice, because the precedent is right there in front of us.
The deep state exists, but the deep state cannot be the omnibus defense for every policy failure or policy paralysis.
I'll leave it at that. Sai Deepak for speaking to us. Thank you very much.